here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the guitarist, actor and composer. It's the one and only Zander Schloss, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Has been in a lot of musical combos and bands, including the Circle Jerks, the Weirdos. Has worked with people like Joe Strummer, also Alex Cox, and lots more. So you'll find out all about it in this interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Zander, it's over to you.
Oh man, there's been so many of it. I'm a 40-year veteran, professional musician and veteran of the music industry, but I'm also, a I want to say, 51-year-old, music enthusiast and guitarist. I've been playing since I was 12 years old, and of course, my original inspiration was this is going to sound almost Dickensian, like a Charles Dickens novel, but I took an interest in Bob Dylan and had a bunch of harmonicas. And I got a job when my parents split up at this candy factory downtown called Bissinger's. And apparently the ghost of Carl Bissinger's was still living upstairs. But anyway, it was my job as a janitor to clean up, this candy factory. And I got a job there working to make money to buy my first guitar. And as I said, I had the harmonicas and all that other stuff. I had also received for my birthday Bob Dylan's anthology and his album Nashville Skyline. So I'm working at this candy factory, and you could hear the ghost over the intercom upstairs. It was very, very spooky. One day I was in the licorice room, and licorice is hardened by cornstarch. That's how they make it from a liquid into licorice.
Yeah.
And I was sweeping up the cornstarch, and out of the cornstarch appeared an apparition of a man in a top hat and tails. And I ran out of the candy store, never to return again. And that was a great job for a 12-year-old kid, unlimited candy and, making money and, a few blocks away from my mother's apartment. But anyway, I had made enough money to buy my first guitar and proceeded to learn by ear every song on Nashville Skyline. And then I was originally, I'm from three generations of artists on my father's side. And I drew myself, if you know the cover of Nashville Skyline, it's Bob
Yes.
Dylan in a top hat with a harmonica holder and his guitar. And I drew my face. I drew a very realistic replica of that and put my face instead of Bob Dylan's on the drawing. And I was transformed into, Zander the musician,
Yes.
but at any rate, as Bob Dylan, I thought, well, reading about him as Bob Dylan transformed from, what was his Robert Zimmerman into sort of like, his hero who was, my brain, I'm drinking coffee.
Woody Guthrie?
Woody Guthrie. I had, thought, okay, I'm going to transform from, little Zandy Schloss, kid living in St. Louis, to Bob Dylan, you know. And when we got the opportunity, so Bob Dylan was long story short, Bob Dylan was my original inspiration.
He was your man. So where did you say you grew up? Where was this?
St. Louis, Missouri.
Right.
Home of Chuck Berry, home of Miles Davis, home of Ike and Tina Turner.
Right. That's quite a roll call of people. And you mentioned you were sort of from a family of artists. So was it on your mother's or father's side, the artistic?
My father's side, all the women in the family were fine artists, oil painters. And my grandmother on my father's side used to do artwork for propaganda posters for the Second World War.
Right.
And yeah, and her sister, Amy, was somebody who took me under her wing and taught me about culture and music. She'd take me to the opera, she'd take me to the ballet. We'd go to triple features at the movie theater, and she ran an art school. So I was originally going to uh, go in the footsteps of these ladies and become a fine artist.
So it's all on the women's side, the artists. The men,
Yes.
men went off and did whatever men do at that time. Yes, so cool. So what sort of posters did she do? Do you have any? Not possibly originals, but did you ever see the artwork that she did for the Second World War propaganda machine?
I have, but mainly I saw some of her personal paintings, and a lot of her friends' paintings, and a lot of my aunt's friends' paintings. And I happen to have a political cartoon, one of the first that came out in the Post Dispatch by a guy named Fitzpatrick, and it's a charcoal, political cartoon.
Yes.
Um,
How did they get on with McCarthyism during, post Second World War in America? Did they navigate that kind of period okay? Were they kind of liberal bohemian types or
Very liberal bohemian types, and I'd heard stories of my aunt Amy, who was my grandmother Sophie's sister. She had been known to hang out with Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera and George O'Keeffe in
Oh,
New
I was going to say
Mexico.
that. I was going to say Georgia O'Keeffe because every time I see bindweed, Nick flowers, I always think it's quite beautiful. And I know we went down to New Mexico to the museum to see some of her work, and I was thinking that desert landscape that she did, and bones and
Yeah,
wildflowers.
so she was a super unique lady. She was a spinster. She never ever married. You know what I mean? And just an amazing collection of beautiful paintings by some of her friends. That should be in a museum, but I happen to have them hanging in my room.
Right. Well, that's probably better than having pictures of, I don't know, pop stars, or I don't know, the Goodfellas or Betty Blue in my day. Those ones from the 80s, Robert De
Right.
Niro. Yeah. So God, you definitely had quite a different childhood actually in your sort of having access or awareness of so many cultural sort of genres at this point: ballet, opera, art, fine art, probably pop. What about popular art? Were they also interested in the sort of the work that was coming out with Andy Warhol and the pop movement?
Not so much. And I tend to gravitate towards the classics myself. And the funny juxtaposition to that is that on my mother's side, she is from three generations of men who worked in the meatpacking industry. So these were all salt of the earth, like Germanic, butchers and slaughterhouse operatives, and country folk. And so
Yes.
a lot of my time in the summer was spent with that side of the family, in Missouri, catching crawdads in the river, and sort of living a life like Tom Sawyer or Huck Finn.
Yes, it does. I was thinking, just channeling those images of childhood TV, and yes, Tom Sawyer,
Well, what's
Huckleberry Finn.
incredible about that, and now as a byproduct of my occupation of choice, it's like I am at home wherever I go in any condition. I could be in a tent or I could be in a palace. I could be in a very, very rugged and rural situation, or be in a very sophisticated cultural situation. And I have to thank the juxtaposition of those two backgrounds for my ability to pivot from one side to the other, and my curiosity for art and music and culture and all these things, which I found when I did meet Joe Strummer for the first time. um, he shared a lot of the same sort of like curiosity, and in fact my god is curiosity, and I think it was his as well. And I think he recognized that, although we never spoke of it. that same kind of like curiosity for everybody and everything.
Yes, I worry that I've missed out on something, and have to sort of try and engage, even if you eventually come out the other side thinking that wasn't quite my thing. But I'm pleased to have I've gone through it a little bit. I sort of went
Sure.
to. I used to get sort of quite a few free tickets to go to the theatre or to see productions, so I said yes to everything, and most of it was good, but I still found opera quite hard work. I have to confess. I know.
Yeah. Yeah. I did too.
It just never quite. I wanted to. I was open to it, so I was pleased with that. But so look, when
But
you got, yeah,
go
sorry.
ahead. No, I was going to say, I forget what I was going to say. You go ahead.
Yeah, so you were born like 61, and then you were in your, yeah, so you were at school during your sort of working in the candy factory and seeing ghosts at that time, which was the early 70s, wasn't it? And you bought your first guitar. Did you have any older brothers or sisters that gave you any influence, or was it mostly your aunts and sort of relatives?
I did, and if you've ever, like going back to Bob Dylan, reading his book Chronicles, where he talks about like listening to his friends' record collections and looking out the window and going to the library and skimming newspaper articles and reading excerpts out of books and stuff. I always thought, Dylan is like a laureate poet, and compared to some of his work to Dante's Inferno and all this other really heady stuff. And it brought to light to me that Dylan was actually a skimmer like myself. And going back to my brothers and sisters, at the time, my sister, I have two sisters and a brother, all three older than me. My brother's 4 years older than me. He was into all the popular music that was coming out at the time, so he get all the new records. Who's Next? Beatles' Abbey Road, or Janis Joplin's "Take Another Piece of My Heart." And all this stuff. But my sister Melanie, who was 4 years older, was not only into all the great R&B, like the soul, like the Diana Ross, and the Supremes and Marvin Gaye and the Four Tops and the Temptations, Ike and Tina Turner and all that kind of stuff. But she was also kind of a hippie.
Right,
So she was into the Grateful Dead and Country Joe and the Fish and
the
you know
airplane.
yeah, Jefferson Airplane, and into a whole. So I was introduced to a whole array of different influences from my older brothers and sisters. But when it was time for me to make my own decisions, like I said, it was Bob Dylan and people like Doc and Merle Watts, and because I wanted to like learn how to be a proficient flat picker of country and bluegrass music. That was my beginnings.
Yes, it was interesting because I think wasn't Dylan quite influenced by people like Laurie, oh God, Lonnie Donegan. Gee, there you
Yeah.
go. People like that. I remember sort of the Beatles, I think it was Paul and John both saying Lonnie Donegan was this kind of very important person in their life, and Bob Dylan was also quite influenced by him, as well as Woody Guthrie and obviously some of the blues characters and country. But yes, these kind of these characters that you don't really associate with certain the beginning of popular music culture, but actually had a sort of massive influence on them, which was quite interesting.
Well, when you hear people talk about like punk rock, for instance, they hear like the Sex Pistols or some of these bands that could barely play their instruments, and they thought to themselves, "Oh, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. Let's start a punk band, right?" When I heard people like Bob Dylan or Neil Young or Leonard Cohen playing, the acoustic guitar and singing, a lyric that, in a melody, it was a direct, like, sort of like path to this is the bones of the song, this is the lyric, this is the melody. And I thought to myself, as an ear player, I was like, I can digest that. Of course, I can do that. And so I wanted to become like a solo troubadour guy like that. But as time went by, I started to get into jazz and, John Coltrane and Charlie Parker and like, blah, 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 like all this like crazy stuff. And of course, going through my rock and roll period in high school, being in a rock cover band and playing, Led Zeppelin and Jeff Beck and, all the, standard rock stuff of the day, Guitar Hero stuff, Jimi
Yes.
Hendrix. But
So
upon graduating high school, I moved in with my jazz teacher, and took a very disciplined approach to learning jazz. Very, very, very stringent, daily program. And then I moved to Los Angeles to get into the competitive stream. I went to music school and joined a funk band.
right. So going back, did you like the work of John McLaughlin and those kind of jazz guitar greats?
I love it. I love any kind of muscular guitar picking from, the Delta blues era. But what I really started to acknowledge, and this is, in the last like 10, 20 years, is the English, Irish, and Scottish folk music, like people like Bert Jansch and Nick Drake, and, some of these really super muscular.
Did you get into
And
Davy Graham? He did a song called Angie, which was like that
yeah,
kind of instrumental, which was just mind blowing.
yeah, and so, my solo stuff, the stuff that I write on my own, I thought, I could hear a lot of the, people that are trying to write timeless songs and stuff, but I can hear their influences only go back like 20 years, 30 years. I said to myself, what would it be like if your influences went back hundreds of years, even to like the great lutists of the time, in Baroque and classical music. And so I listen to classical radio all the time. It's on all the time, and it sort of regulates my brain. So a lot of the stuff that I'm doing has kind of roots in Irish, English, and Scottish folk music, Baroque, and classical.
Yes, well, it's always I love sort of dipping back into those periods, and also there was a really good series I remember listening to where they were talking about the political time, which was mostly controlled by the church, and the pressure composers were under to write pieces of music and sort of not offend anybody. People walked on eggshells in those days because obviously you wouldn't go to prison; you just get your head cut off.
Well, if you're going outside the world of unisons, octaves, or perfect fifths, if you start to drop the fifth or raise the fifth, it becomes sacrilegious. You know what I mean? So when
Yes.
you listen to the Gregorian monks, you'll never hear a third or a major seventh or a minor seventh. It's all very, very pure.
Yeah, God, I love listening to Gregorian chant, mostly during the winter months. Do
Yeah.
you find music is quite seasonal? Do you find Nick Drake is autumn, John Martin autumn, Joni Mitchell can be both winter and summer, depending on what albums, and Van Morrison has a sort of romantic melancholia, which reminds me of sometimes going to festivals in the summer and sometimes winter as well.
Yeah, and people like Sly Stone and rest in peace, and you know Brian Wilson, rest in peace. Those are very summertime bands for me, and very, very important influence as well. My influences are so varied. All the stuff that I did with Joe, and he had an interest in me from doing the movie Straight to Hell, where I had brought my guitar to the set in Almeria, Spain, and was learning flamenco technique from all the locals and stuff.
Right.
Not just that, but like jamming with Shane McGowan and also Elvis Costello. But my influences of Latin was so major, and then when I went to Nicaragua, same thing. I brought a guitar to the set and was gobbling up all the marimba and cumbias and all the different influences, the Caribbean influences in Nicaragua is all over the place. And that's when Joe asked me to um, contribute all the stringed instruments to the Walker soundtrack, which was the movie that Alex Cox had filmed down in Nicaragua.
Yes. Did you ever veer the other way and go to Ravi Shankar and sort of trying to play the sitar at all?
Yes, I did. And I'm very into Eastern music. I've also been playing the Greek bouzouki for a good 25 years in a traditional Greek tuning. And, you know, I'm so into Eastern music. I'm so into all of it, dude.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I always remember listening to Richie Blackmore sort of talking about his inspirations, and often it was like Bulgarian folk music that you'd hear, and just put that from an acoustic guitar or instrument onto electric guitar, and then creating one of those kind of classic rock riffs. But no one would ever know where the real inspiration came from. But obviously, it was very good, So
Oh, yeah.
it's very cunning. So, what was your? Because you being, a few years older than me, what was your first concert you went to then? At that sort of.
Well, it's funny you should say that because I can remember going. I wouldn't consider the concert that I went to with my parents like being a first concert, but the first concert that which was Chicago. I'm not even going to count that. But the first concert that I really ever made an effort to see was a guy named Leo Cocky, who, oddly enough, what I do is I'm like I talk about the muscular finger pickers. I play the 12-string guitar, not unlike Leo Cocky, trying to get the most potential out of the guitar that I can as a finger picker, and in my voicings, with bass, melody, and the chords, of course, blah blah blah. Just Leo Cocky kind of blew my mind because it was one guy playing instrumentals, and it sounded like an orchestra. Um,
Yes.
so, and that, then I went on. I dropped that whole thing. I didn't even remember and until, probably, much much later, when I started to take an interest in, like I said, the English, Scottish, and Irish folk music, and Bert and Nick and all these people. I thought, oh shoot, Leo Kottke. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
What about Richard Thompson? Was he also on your radar as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And in my jazz period, I didn't even listen to guitar players. People say, well, why didn't you listen to Joe Pass or anything like that? Because I was busy trying to learn what it feels like to play, piano lines, say, Bill Evans, or learn saxophone lines like John Coltrane or Charlie Parker. What does that feel like when your fingers hit the fretboard?
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, Kind of Blue is one of those albums, isn't it? Like Love Supreme, where you just think, God, you've lucked out on that one, haven't you? You've picked the good one.
Well, and just so amazing, Miles coming from a bebop sort of tradition, and taking the risk to write all these incredibly beautiful, languid jazz ballads. And most of my solo stuff is based in the ballad world as well. Because of course, my day job is as uh, 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 the bassist in a band called the Circle Jerks,
Yes.
which is a hardcore punk band, and we play some of the fastest, most primitive and loud, aggressive music. You know what I mean? It's just, 240, 250 BPM each song, 32 songs in an hour. It's incredibly fast and incredibly sort of like primitive, which to me has complete musical merit, and the merit of whipping people up into a frenzy so that they can blow off steam, which we all need to do these days. But of course, my solo stuff is the exact polar opposite. It's slow and languid and transparent and beautiful, and
Yes.
yeah.
It's very by the mid 70s then, are you still in have you gone to LA at this point?
Yeah, no. In the mid 70s, I'm still probably down in San Diego going to high school. I graduated in 1979, lived with my jazz teacher for a year and painted houses, and
Right.
then came up to Los Angeles and went to music school and got a job at the Chinese theater as a popcorn boy. So
Yes. Had you, I mean, on the artistic world, there was a lot of performance art groups and such like the Cockets, the Cockets, yes, and people like that, and people doing experimental mime theatre and stuff like that, and going out of there, taking lots of drugs probably as well. Were you fascinated with that kind of world as well, being on that side of the country, the west side?
Well, I mean, I don't know it so much, you know what I mean? But I'm fascinated with anything that is interesting and well crafted. All the things that we've spoke of. Some of the first bands that I saw when I came to Los Angeles were uh, I was completely enamored with a band called The Plugs that were from East LA, and like a Latin flavored sort of punk rock, who eventually went on to do the score for Repo Man, of which I ended up contributing music to and acting in. Um,
Yes.
so bands like that and X, the Blasters, a lot of the more musical bands, Los Lobos, a lot of the more musical and sort of Americana tinged interesting musical punk rock bands of the day.
Yes.
Because I'm thrust into this local scene and introduced to all the crazy characters of who have now become my peer group of the golden years of punk rock. You know.
Yes, it was so. And when you were still at school, and then your jazz moment or odyssey, as they say in Spinal Tap, were you kind of then sort of on one here? There was the folk and the classical, and then God, there was the Sex Pistols, the Clash, the Ramones. Were you kind of fascinated with that, or were you thinking, God, that's not art, that's not craft?
No, I didn't think it was art. I didn't think it was craft. To be honest, you know what I mean. I don't mean to pull my own covers, but even like some of the early Clash stuff, and as I've said, I worked as Joe's, musical director and guitarist for several years after the Clash broke up, between the Mescaleros and the Clash. But I had to go all the way to Sandinista and work my way backwards in a more dyslexic way, and seeing the development of the band and going, back in time because, you know, to me, Sandinista was like more world music. It had everything from rock and roll to reggae to dub to, more Caribbean sounds, so many things. And, I just was enamored with their growth. I've always watched bands, and everybody starts out very simply, and then they start to expand. Of course, the Beatles, the Stones, Exile on Main Street. You know what I
Yes,
mean? Sergeant
no,
Pepper's,
that's amazing. Yes, Exile.
the Beach Boys, Pet
That
Sounds.
period with Mick Taylor for the Stones, I thought his 5 years with that band were just amazing.
Amazing, dude. And I had the opportunity to meet Mick Taylor. I knew this woman who ran an Airbnb out in Palm Springs, and I met her, and I was staying at her Airbnb with my girlfriend, and she says, Mick is coming to town, and I want you to meet him. And I was like, oh, because her husband was a security guy for the Rolling Stones. And I said, oh shit, am I going to meet Mick Jagger? And I come into the room, and it's Mick Taylor.
Right.
And I meet Mick Taylor, and we're smoking cigarettes out on the patio, and we both pick up a couple of guitars and play some guitar together. And my girlfriend, I said to her, "Do you know who you just met? You just met a Rolling Stone. You just met not only a Rolling Stone, but one of the greatest members of the Rolling Stone." And she says, "Oh, I thought I just meeting like some fat drunk guy." I was like,
Oh, it's so easily done. But yes, God, his guitar work on those albums. Yes, he was amazing. I think he ended up in somewhere down in East Anglia, in Suffolk, actually. I don't know. It must be a very strange life being Mick Taylor still. But then 79 then, you've embraced the world of jazz and folk, and then punk rock. How do you then sort of navigate into the 80s at this point?
well, it's funny because, like I said, one of my first concerts here in Los Angeles was the Watts Tower Festival. So I was playing in a funk band down in South Central LA, funk and R&B. And not really making too much money doing it, and living in a 10 by 10 office space on Hollywood Boulevard, without a bathroom or a shower, or anything, you know what I mean? And I walked out in the street, and another kind of just Dickensian sounding story, but I had already been in the film Repo Man, and was also trying to, be an actor in Los Angeles, and that wasn't going so well. But a car pulled up, and a couple of friends of mine that had been working, one of the actresses in Repo Man, Jennifer Balgobin, and the set photographer Walt Cronin pull up, and they said Circle Jerks are looking for a bass player. And I said, well, what are you talking to me about? I'm a guitarist. And they're like, hey man, you look like you could use a gig. And I was like,
Yes.
okay, I'm going to swallow my pride. I had a fretless jazz bass from, that I was taking, bass lessons on, jazz bass lessons as well. And they said, I called up Greg Hudson from Circle Jerks. He says, learn these three songs. I was like, with my jazz, background, I was like, 3 songs, I'll learn all 3 of your records and show up prepared. So I showed up with this fretless jazz bass, and out of 50 guys who were applicants for the job, got the gig, and then I was off and running in this whole new world.
Yes.
um, but it allowed me to get experience, making records and recording studios and touring, nationally at the time. And I'm just working all these muscles, like I
Yes.
said, the funk works the counterpoint and rhythmic muscle. The jazz works the intellectual brain muscle. You know what I mean? And all these musics that are traditional, like classical, harmony and orchestration, blah blah blah. It all work. They all work different muscles. Punk rock works a muscle as well, which is we're taking like a piece of coal and we're mashing it down until it becomes a diamond, and then we shoot a laser beam out into the audience of just pure energy, which whips them into a frenzy and then becomes a circle back to us. You know what I mean? So it's literally like energy work, and
Yes.
the
Well, that's
dexterity and the accuracy, the technique that it takes to play that fast is also an important tool to have.
yes. So just going back to dear old Repo Man, because that was one of those cult classics that we all loved in the 80s. Did you say you starred in it as well as contributed to the soundtrack, or have I misheard all
Wait,
that bit?
which
Repo Man.
Repo Man? I had become friends with Alex as a result of when I moved to Los Angeles and went to music school. I was an aspiring film composer, and I would go down to UCLA Film School and post flyers saying, I will score your student film for free.
Right.
And I got a couple of people that bit, and met one person who was Alex Cox, and he was a graduate student down at UCLA Film School, um, preparing to write his first theatrical script and make his first theatrical release, and befriended him. He was mostly interested in me doing some music for him. Um, he liked my band, the Juicy Bananas, which appears on the Repo Man soundtrack. But we ended up becoming friends, and literally, as he's writing the script, I'm working these little low end jobs, and getting fired from grocery stores and stealing groceries and bringing them back to Alex, as he's preparing, to make this film. I got a job as a production assistant on the film, and was only set to contribute some music from the Juicy Bananas. But they they took me aside and they said, we want you to play the role of Kevin the nerd. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. I have no idea, I've never acted before in my life, but I always say yes to any opportunity. And I would suggest anybody listening out there, say
Yes.
yes. and be well prepared by figure it out. But at any rate, I got on the set, and there was two, yeah, and then they actually fired me the same day that they hired me, and hired Chris Penn, Sean Penn's younger brother, to play the part. And as I'm delivering the dailies, which are the daily footage that they've shot, we're looking at Michael Nesmith from the Monkees, who was executive producer, and Alex are looking at the dailies of Chris Penn's performance of Kevin the Nerd from that day. And Michael looks over at him and he says, "This is awful, Alex. What are we going to do?" And Alex says, "Well, originally I wanted Zander to play the role of Kevin." He says, "Let's give him a shot." But I was lurking around the corner. I heard the conversation. I went and shaved my head into not a full mohawk, but a faux hawk, kind of like Travis Bickle
Taxi.
from Taxi Driver. And I showed up on the set in character. I'm like the Daniel Day-Lewis of independent films or something. I just was in character as a production assistant. I am Kevin. I had told them when they fired me, I said, "You're making a big mistake. I am Kevin the Nerd."
Right.
And so eventually I show up 2 weeks into it, the day after my 21st birthday, and I arrive for my production assistant job, and there's a star on the trailer that says my name. And then I'm off and running as an actor in independent films, and I became part of Alex's troupe of actors through and contributing music for all of his films. In fact, I just did a film with Alex in Almeria, Spain, down there in Andalusia, in the desert, where we shot Straight to Hell, playing a wagon, like a what do you call them? Like a wagoneer,
Yes, I've got you. Yeah, because I saw him, the last time I saw him, he was sort of crowdfunding for a film. And was this the film that he was being crowdfunding for?
That's the film. And he gave me a giant, big, very big role in this film, kind of as an old timey teamster to drive
Yes.
him around. He's playing the main character of this guy named Strindler. I don't want to reveal too much about
No.
it.
But there you go. And what was Harry Dean Stanton like to be with on Repo Man?
Well, for me, he was lovely. He'd come into my trailer, and again, I'd have my guitar with me, and we would play Spanish songs. He was quite enamored with all these beautiful Spanish ballads, or more in the Mexican vein.
Yes, and Emilio, is it Emilio? It's
Emilio Estevez, yeah, he was a young actor just starting out, and I literally, as I'm sitting in my trailer one day, he comes in with three other guys from his neighborhood, friends, and later on I'm to find out it was Charlie Sheen, his younger brother, Rob Lowe, and Tom Cruise. And so I'm like sitting in the trailer with all these, aspiring actors who are like to become like, big Hollywood stars.
very big. God, it was one of those must-see films, wasn't it? There was Jim Jarmusch, there was Repo Man, there was also Betty Blue, as I mentioned, and Wings of Desire. Yeah, Wings of Desire. There was just all those art house cinema films that we, embraced with great enthusiasm. We all
Well,
wanted to.
yeah, and Robbie Mueller, who was the cinematographer for Repo Man, immediately after we shot, and he was a Wim Wenders guy, Tim
Right.
Wenders. They immediately went down to uh, the last day of shooting Repo Man to Texas to film Paris, Texas.
Oh, classic. God, that was a good film, wasn't it? Yes, God. I know. And there was another one, wasn't it? Baghdad Cafe. There was a lot of films, got existential films in deserts, weren't there, during that period? When
Yeah.
people, we love the desert films. Yes, so that was your mid-80s was taking off. And then the Circle Jerk. So you were just their bass player, Bosch. They had been going for about no, they'd been going for quite a while, hadn't they?
Yeah. Since I think like 1980, and I joined in '84, and shortly after, I'm taking a walk with Joe Strummer, through the back streets of Almeria, Spain, and talking to Joe about, are you ever gonna come back again and form a band? And he's I think he's all but like 34 years old at the time, and he says, "You don't want to, you don't want to play with me. I'm an old man, blah blah blah." But later on, he says to me, "Hey man, you're such an incredible guitar player. What are you wasting your time playing bass in a hardcore punk rock band? Come and play guitar with me."
Yes. But you were on their album, don't Wonderful, which was the 85. So you contributed to that particular studio
Yes.
experience. And what was that? Did you record that all in Crystal Studios, Hollywood?
Yeah, Crystal Studios, who, by the way, one night I was in the kitchen, I don't know, getting a drink of water or something. I hear the doorbell ring and I look out of the kitchen door and there's Sly Stone, wanting to get into buzzed into the building. I was like, what the hell? So I got to meet Sly Stone when we were recording one of those records at Crystal.
Wow, that must have, yes, I suppose at the time. You never know, do you? But we all loved Family Affair, didn't we? We thought it was one of the great songs of all time.
Oh
It's
man, so great.
It was so great. Actually, Iggy Pop has got a nice version of that, so I always quite enjoy that little moment. So then Joe came into your life in sort of 86, 87,
Something like that, yeah.
and then you were on his album, is it Walker?
Walker, we initially did Walker and then did another film, Permanent Record, which the single Trash City came from. And then we went on to make Earthquake Weather, which was, Joe's, fabled first outing as a solo artist.
Yes, and was that quite a big thing for him at that stage? Because obviously when the Clash finished, it ended with that album. Was it Cut the Crap, which wasn't the greatest studio album, was it?
Yeah.
And then sort of Mick Jones had Big Audio Dynamite that just went from being big to even bigger to, doing all these interesting things. And Joe was kind of floundering a bit really at this stage, wasn't he?
Well, Joe, people say that he was floundering. I think I would use the word searching, and maybe checking in on his ego. You know what I mean? And because I think it was really difficult for him. The breaking up of the Clash. If I could speak to it, it seemed like he may have had some felt a little sorry about that. You know.
Yes, it was a beautiful, well, like any artist or anything, it's a beautiful thing, and having to process some stuff, something when it's gone is quite. It takes a bit of time, doesn't it? As we were talking about earlier, it's hard, it's tough. So, what was the experience like with Earthquake Weather? Had you relocated to the UK at this stage?
No, not at that stage. Joe came to Hollywood, and we assembled a band of American musicians. Myself, Jack Irons, and Lonnie Marshall, and we went in and cut the music. And Joe, Joe would bring me these 4-track recordings, sketches of the songs, and it was my job to flesh them out and arrange them. And it was at the time there was no way that I was going to try to emulate or imitate anything Clash like and step into the shoes of Mick Jones. I was enthusiastic young gunslinger, but there was in no way that I was going to be an imitation. And I think Joe liked that. And at the period of time, I call it Joe's beat period because a lot of his songs were like travel logs and much more centered in mature, not barking out, about the wrongs of society and blah 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 and political stuff. It was very subdued and very, which was what Joe was experiencing. I had lived with Joe in a house down in Nicaragua, and and in Spain, and his kind of searching. You know what I mean? But in retrospect, I also think that was to also put out the message that you're not going to have a Clash reunion. I'm no longer the barking singer of that particular band. It's not going to happen, to his record company. And I think they were pretty surprised by Earthquake Weather because it was a giant kind of art record.
Yes, it was very different, wasn't it? Yes.
And, we went on tour and, came to the States, and eventually we got our walking papers, and they said, Joe is dropped off Epic Records, which I don't want to speak out of turn because Joe can't defend himself. Rest in peace, Joe.
Yes.
But I think that part of the reason why he sat back and was, doing what he was doing with Earthquake Weather was to send a message to the heads of Epic Records saying, you don't want me on your label anymore. Set me free. And which they did.
Yes, it was their kind of moment. Well, yes, that opportunity. And had you worked much on the Alex Cox film Sid and Nancy? Had that been something that had been sort of you'd been engaged with?
Yes, but as I'm uncredited because of union issues, England versus America, I'm uncredited. But when you see the trash falling, from the sky, and Sid and Nancy are making out in the alley, that's me playing guitar. There's a lot of scenes where um, there's the scenes when the composed music rather than the covers of the Clash or
Yes.
anybody else. That's me playing guitar.
Nice, nice. God,
Yeah.
must have been a nice one. But then your diary is getting quite full at this point because you've got quite a few commitments with Joe, Alex, and then also the Circle Jerks as well, haven't you? Because they're quite active at this point. Had their audience, were they still a band on the way up, or had they sort of gone in that way that with a lot of bands they go up and then they stabilize and then they have periods, don't they, up and down. What was the kind of the world of the Circle Jerks on that front?
Well, Circle Jerks are a legendary band, and through my experience, I've learned what legends are made of. Legends are made of doing something great and then disappearing. You know what I mean? So you'll say, "Hey, maybe Sid Vicious is a legend," or Janis Joplin is a legend, or Jim Morrison. They do something great and then they die. But certain bands will make some great albums and then they'll disappear into obscurity. And that's what legends are made of their absence. That's my point. But we reunited and we kept on soldiering on. But it's been a fractious relationship and ups and downs with that band. Currently, we're enjoying incredible success, in our recent reuniting, um, because of the anticipation and the time that's passed. 15 years passed between the last time we played and when we started playing in 2022. um and so that builds a lot of anticipation, and we're doing great. The business is great. We're filling up rooms and you know um firing on all cylinders with our new drummer Joey Castillo, who's formerly of Wasted Youth and Queens of the Stone Age and
Right.
Danzig. um
God, yes, that's a very nice little moment. And how did you, as an artist, navigate in, because you probably realize that there's always these like trends and tribes that happen during music. And, in a simplistic way, we had the punk period and post-punk, and then there was goth and psychobilly. And then, in the UK, we had indie pop. But then towards the late 80s, there was that ecstasy world comes in, and then dance music starts to appear. And then you have that Seattle grunge scene happening, and you realize that some bands that might have been happening on the zeitgeist 3 or 5 years ago are suddenly really struggling to be relevant, and their fans are got to be they're not bothered about the third or fourth album because they've got the first two. They saw them on the way up and they're sort of going down. So how did you navigate that kind of transition into the 90s?
Well, I had started some original bands, you know what I mean, and I, you know, transitioned into major labels, who were signing bands left and right, you know what I mean, and there was a time where the music industry, you could really make a decent living, you know what I mean, um, but look, there's a difference between commercial artists and artistic artists, as it is in the painting world. Production artists like Andy Warhol can become very rich and successful or whatever, but you have your Vincent van Goghs, who don't achieve success until after their death.
Yes.
I'm probably one of those guys, like going more of the artistic path, because I literally believe in the last man standing theory. It's like, put your blinders on, put your earmuffs on, don't look around, look down at the ground, put one foot in front of the other. And, if you really want to be a unique artist, go your own way and let people sort you out or not sort you out,
Yes. Well,
So,
I think it's quite interesting because a lot of the stuff that I liked during the 80s was very sort of indie and it's alternative and all that label. And and then time passes and it kind of gets a bit put into the broom cupboard or swept under the carpet. But then recently people have I found, and you must have seen this yourself, suddenly people are writing their memoirs, documentaries coming out, exhibitions. In Las Vegas you have the Museum of Punk Rock, don't you? And then you have they have the punk bowling weekends, and there's the original fans, but there's all these kids who reminisce, oh, it must have been great in the 70s and 80s, you must have all been having a great time. And you think, yeah, no, we weren't actually, but it's nice that you think the 80s must have been such a great time to be alive. But we just bummed around and struggled, as you do. But the great music, but a lot of that music sort of, it's now being remastered, put on compilations, re-released, and you think, God, actually I there's lots of music I listen to now. What wasn't the music that I listened to at the time, but bands that I missed, and I think, God, this is really good. I don't know if you've had the same thing of thinking, because you don't really want to hear the thing that you would listen to when you were 18 or 20, but you think, oh, this is a record that I was, passed me by, and this band, because you couldn't always get music, could you? You had to go and buy it, or you had to go to the library, or a friend would give you a TDK D90 cassette with it on, and you never know if you're going to play that or not. But it wasn't you couldn't just stream it. You couldn't go, oh, I want to listen to that and listen to it. It was a lot of effort.
Yeah, and through convenience, I think we've sort of lost our bearings a little bit. Not us necessarily, because you're a 61-year-old guy, I'm a 63-year-old guy. We experienced a time where music was so important. You could hold something in your hand and you had to go looking for it, and you could hold the album cover in your hand and look at the liner notes and the photos and the credits and all this great
play
stuff.
to maximum. Home taping's killing music.
If this had been going on when I was a kid, I wouldn't have found the inspiration to make it a life choice, to make a career of it. And I do my surveys as a traveling musician, and I ask these young kids, because we get a lot of very, very young people coming to our shows, what is it about the circle jerks that you're interested in? Because I would think you're out there watching Charlie XCX and some of these other women stomping around having a tantrum in their underwear. But
lovely
you know what I
nails,
mean.
lovely
But
eyelashes.
they say we are looking for something real. We're looking for something authentic, and as a result of all this fabricated nonsense that's going on out there, and giant dance troops and pyrotechnics and multimedia and all this stuff that's going on, there are still people that are looking for something real. I don't know necessarily what my point is, but I think I'm addressing your question.
Yes, well, absolutely. It's well, I think I was making a point about me going back and discovering the bands I missed the first time and realizing actually it was better than I imagined. And also people put their life and soul into it. Because I think during that period, there was no career ambition because there was like, I think the world's going to come to an end because Russia and America are going to nuke everybody. We also had Chernobyl as well, which didn't seem a very good thing. And there was no, you had the yuppies on the right who were having quite a good time, even though they probably weren't. And then you had all the people on the left who were sort of just, angry about stuff. But there was no like, oh, you go to college, get a career, then you'll go up the ladder. It was like there wasn't that possibility. It was like, well, you'll be on the. We had social security and unemployment benefit in this country, and a lot of people were just doing that. So huge communities, and you just kind of sign on, get a minimum amount of money and just survive. But so a lot of bands formed. I think that was why the 80s had so many people, because we had something called the Job Seekers Allowance, where you could make out that you were going to be an artist for 1 year, and you wouldn't have to get hassled by the admin staff. You could just be an artist, which was mainly going to probably drink, smoke, and bands in this country. We had people like John Peel. The John Peel show was a big thing, and you'd get a John Peel session, and Dale Griffin, who was the drummer for Mott the Hoople, would do the production and make a great record. And then, as you know, the UK is tiny. You could literally put it in your back pocket. And every city in town has an alternative indie night, and you could just get your transit van and trundle around. So, a 20-year-old can think, hell, this is better than what I was doing, sitting in my bed sit or in my parents' house. And you could play the rock and roll life for 5 years and get away with it.
Yeah, and those were we look back on those times that may have been so difficult, and all the yearning that we were doing, around things. Wish things were different. You know what I mean? And now we look back on those are some of the greatest years of our lives. You know, I keep hoping there's going to be another cultural revolution, and I think times are ripe for it. You know what I mean? We had the cultural revolution in the '60s. We also had the cultural revolution of punk rock and in the '80s, which has become oddly, if you would have asked me back then, I would have told you that it was a trend and it would pass. But now it's become so pervasive in every corner of culture, and we're more popular than ever. But I'm hoping that times are right because you know we're in the worst of times again, and I'm hoping it's right for another cultural revolution where people are the art gets better, the films
Yes.
get better, the music gets better.
Well, yes. Well, yes. It's funny, sort of remembering some of these films that you've been part of. But also, I remember there was other ones like a brilliant film called A Letter to Brezhnev, which was one of those films with Margie Clark in, which was really amazing, and Leningrad Cowboys Go to Moscow, which was another one of those cult classics. I don't know if it was the 80s or 90s, but yeah, they were just, and obviously there was Spinal Tap as well, and With Nell and
Yeah.
I, which we all loved at the time, thinking that was good. So then, with the Circle Jerks, obviously that's been one of those kind of interest relationships. But you then had a moment with the Weirdos, didn't you, as well? Was that a very
Yeah.
brief moment? Was that like so
No, it
brief?
wasn't very brief. It was literally coinciding with the Circle Jerks. I was in maybe four bands, in the mid to late '80s through the early '90s and stuff, and again into the 2000s. But I was in Thelonious Monster, the Circle Jerks, the Weirdos, and another band that I started with Dick Rude, from Repo Man and Straight to Hell fame, called the Two Free Stooges.
Right.
Um, but at any rate, no, my stint with them was very long. And I enjoyed that very much. The John Denny and Dick Denny, rest in peace, again, were like brothers to me. And that music is very, very interesting, because it predates hardcore. And it's more of that kind of art rock kind of thing that you were speaking of, where it was more inclusive of everybody, different races, different sexes, different ways of living. um
Yes. Well, it was interesting because the New York punk scene had because I did an interview with a guy from the band Liquid just last night, and so they incorporated all those kind of rhythms and sort of jazz and world music, and there was that record label, wasn't there, called Z Records, and again it was also, I don't know if it was compiled by Brian Eno, but it was a very eclectic mix of bands that were on there, as you could imagine, if Brian Eno was
Yeah.
involved. So yeah,
Yeah,
Z
they were
Records.
interesting times, and there were so many different characters, and the punk rock cops today will set a number of rules and restrictions on whether you're punk or not. But back then, it was like if you were an outsider and you were a weirdo, you were included.
Yes, well, absolutely. So with the Weirdos, you joined for their. It was 2004, wasn't it?
No, I joined
No.
the Weirdos in probably I would say 1980.
Oh, blimey.
88 or something like that. Just after their first full shoot, I'm trying to plug my phone in here.
Yes,
I'm running out of juice.
it does. Yeah, no, that's just life, isn't it? Really, we get to 60 and it's just that's it, the
Um
juice. So night.
yeah, no, I
You were juggling four bands. You just said that, didn't you?
yeah.
And you joined the Weirdos. So did you record much with the Weirdos?
No. I was like a more of a touring musician. Okay, so this says it's charging.
Oh, hurrah.
Um Yeah, I was a touring musician, and John, Dix and I played also in Thelonious Monster together, and John and I had a side project over the last something like 30 years where we were writing songs that were not necessarily in the punk rock, more like Sid Barrett type stuff. You know what I mean? And that still hasn't come out. It's a project that we call Contraption, and at some point it's going to come out. I'm gonna release these hidden tracks. But no, I never recorded an album or a single with the Weirdos.
No, but just what was the what? How did the audience compare to the Circle Jerks?
Um, Gee, hardcore gets a lot of these kind of like jock punks that are
Yes,
beating the crap out of each other and stuff. And the Weirdos had just a lot more oddballs, a lot more women too.
right. That must have softened the audience a bit. And did you tour just America? And did you do the punk rock festival, the bowling punk event in Las Vegas? Was that on your radar?
Yeah, we did punk rock bowling. We did a number of shows off and on. You know what I mean? There, this is another example. The Weirdos are another example of a legendary band, not a working band. A working band makes a record, they go out and do a touring cycle, they write their next record, make a record, go out and do the touring cycle, on and on. So you could cite bands like Green Day or Bad Religion or some of these bands that are working bands.
Yes, well, I
Social
remember.
Distortion.
So Lemmy from Motorhead had that philosophy that it was a job. You did the album, you wrote it, recorded it, then you toured it, and then a couple of weeks off, and then it's back to business, and
Yeah,
that was it. There was no sort of swanning about, messing
yeah.
about. It was just straightforward. Mainly because I think the money had to keep coming in, didn't it? Really, you had to keep the cash flow going at that stage.
Well, and you're building, and these days we can't just necessarily just be artists. We have to be, our own, publicists, and just like our own PR men, and know everything about like. Um, I'm doing a gig tomorrow night, and they're like, "Well, did you post it on social media?" It's like, "What's going on? We need to get bodies in the seats." I'm like, dude. I'm like busy, like rehearsing for the show and writing new songs for my next record, and I want to keep a channel open for being creative. I don't necessarily want to be a PR guy, for
No.
myself.
It's quite hard work, actually, isn't it? So you did the two free studios, and you did that album Roadside Prophets, didn't you? And was that for a soundtrack as well?
Soundtrack, yeah, and um, Two Free Stooges was such a fun band, but at any rate, we only have one recording that's on that soundtrack album. Um, yeah, and Roadside Prophets is another one of those mystical films that you speak of from the 80s.
Yes. And
Yeah,
and one of my other favourite bands, The Wall of Voodoo. What was it like working with Stan Ridgway? Did you work with him at all?
I did. Yeah, I did some music with Stan, and we contributed to God, what was the film that Tapeheads? We contributed to a film called Tapeheads.
Right.
Um, and Stan was a lovely guy. I mean, I always loved Stan's work and Wall of Voodoo, and they were peers. They were people that I admired from back then. When I was living in that 10 by 10 office, I literally was going up to the roof one day, and I guess on the very top floor there were rehearsal rooms because I heard somebody singing "Bing fell down, Bing broke both his legs," and it was Stan Ridgway and Wall of Voodoo rehearsing on the top floor.
Right.
Uh, and Guns N' Roses used to rehearse in this office building as well. And you
Amazing.
could walk down the street and you could hear like X rehearsing in their apartment, like over by Playboy Liquor in Hollywood.
Yes. And then coming up to your current solo stuff. So you did Dear Blue a few years ago, and then songs that,
No, My Dear Blue was a name of a bootleg that I released. These songs that I had recorded for an upcoming album, they were not mastered or sequenced yet. So it wasn't a finished album. The album now has been resequenced and mastered, and one of the songs was taken off to be saved for my second record. Um, but that album is now called Song About Songs.
right. So that was the one. So yes, My Dear Blues on that. So was this all material that you wrote during lockdown, or was this material you had before lockdown?
Yeah, this is way before lockdown. Um, I had been on the road, after being dropped off Interscope Records with Low and Sweet Orchestra. And in good company. Like I think thousands of bands got dropped, during that period of time when they were merging with Universal Music Group. But I was like, okay, you know, oh, the castle doors have closed, you know,
Yes.
and so how am I going to continue to play music? And I did what I do when I run out of money. I downsized and I started traveling and making records with a duo, and playing more gigs, to sort of like make ends meet. But it was a duo called Sean and Zander, and we made a couple of records. And shortly after our 9 year stint, I thought it's time for me to start doing my own solo work.
Right. That's when it all starts to happen. Because this new album, Californians Burning. So
Yeah.
this your kind of album that you wrote during the decade, this early part of the decade?
Yeah. I mean, after the Sean and Xander, the duo broke up, I thought to myself, I got some of these little kids that have been in the orphanage, that weren't being attended to, some of
Yes.
these ideas, and I'm going to take care of my kids. I'm going to flesh out these ideas. So I literally started writing loads and loads of songs, and I got that shoebox material that's like filled up a shoebox that no one's ever going to hear. Some of those 40 or 50 songs that I initially wrote, and then there was a grip of songs that made it onto Song About Songs. And then I started writing in a different particular style when I was approached by a producer, um, having interest in recording my second solo record, and he gravitated towards a song that I wrote called "Trouble I've Seen," which
Hmm.
is more kind of baroque, more, sort of like, I think it's more unique, and I use that as a template for the rest of the record and then I started to orchestrate strings for it and woodwinds and flutes because I've always wanted, had an interest in orchestrating and arranging, and I wanted to do more of a baroque pop sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Yes, it is a beautiful record, I have to say. I've been listening to it, and it works so nice. It's got such a nice texture and vibe, as they say. So yes, it's like, so that was it. Trouble I've Seen is the first one, and then the rest of them. Did it take a while to sort of get the sequence of the songs all nicely put on the album? Do you spend much time on that
Yeah, I
sequence? And
mean, that album. The first album, "Song About Songs," I recorded with a producer and bassist named Gus Seifert, who was playing bass with Roger Waters at the time. Um, and quite busy, but we just did it Nashville style. We walked in the studio, and myself, Gus, the drummer Josh Adams, and Jake Blanton, who plays with the Killers, um, respectively, keyboards. Um, Josh Adams played Jenny Lewis drums, Gus bass, and me singing and playing at the same time. So that was done over the course of 3 days live with minimal overdubs. Um, the second record was made with Alan Johannes, who was, a great producer, great songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, who's played with Queens of the Stone Age, PJ Harvey, them Crooked Vultures, a variety. Mark Lanigan, he had done some incredible albums with Mark. And I that album was more of a production style thing due to the fact that my touring schedule and Alan's schedule, having to go off and do other bands and stuff. So over the course of 6 months, we cobbled it together with 5 tracks that I recorded singing and playing with a bassist at one studio, and then another 6 songs that I recorded with a bassist and a drummer in another studio, and then we went to yet another studio and I orchestrated the strings and did all the keyboards and all of Alan's stuff, um, at a loft studio downtown. And then Alan took it back to his little production studio and did more of his bits and mixed it, and then it went to another studio to be mastered. So it was a big production, man. And making records is no joke, dude. It's second to, I think, making films, in the sort of details that go in pre production, production, and post production.
oh my God, that is a serious moment, isn't it, really, putting that together? And then do you sort of, are you at the moment doing solo shows, just doing solo shows, but, for yourself and promoting your albums?
Yeah, when I can. Like I said, because of the success of the Circle Jerks, our touring schedule is extensive, and so right now I have a little bit of time. I'm doing a show tomorrow night at a place called Heavy Manners Library, which is kind of a bohemian place where they do drawing classes, they do poetry readings, show alternative films and stuff. And it has a captive audience, sit down audience. So I'm playing solo tomorrow night at that venue, and then I'm hosting a kind of a happening at this loft downtown where I'm assembling a group to play the songs that I, wrote for California's Burning, that
Right.
have full ensembles like strings and woodwinds and mandolins and bass and drums and keys, everything, all the bells and whistles. That's happening on the 10th of July. But then I
Blimey.
have to go to Denver and play a festival called Punk in the Park. And I'm currently getting together tomorrow in the afternoon before I go play my gig to start to work on new material for the Circle Jerks.
Right. So there's new stuff coming out.
There could be. I'm not gonna put the cart in front of the horse.
No.
Until there is something, there is nothing.
Yes. And is it at the moment a nice harmonious relationship with the band?
Well, David, have you ever had a relationship with anybody, worked with anybody for 40 years? Have
N-
you ever had a relationship with somebody for 40 years other than the family member who drives you crazy?
To be honest, luckily not, because mostly I'm not very. I have to say it kind of gets quite tedious quite quickly. You have to read the room. You have to be quite. We act in a way. It's a bit like with a dysfunctional family, isn't it? Really, we act sometimes as if we wouldn't act like that in other groups, or if you were really being yourself. But you realise to function within this group, you play a role, you play a part, you just get through it. You keep. For me, I just let whoever needs to talk and dominate the space, dominate the space. I'll just get on with my gig and keep my nose clean and mouth shut. That's me.
Yeah. Well, it's as harmonious as it can be for the nature of all the time and things that have occurred over the course of 40 years.
It's a hell of a relationship, isn't it? It's a
Yeah,
really.
it really is.
But it's on the way at the moment. It's all, I guess it's kind of paying the rent and helping the pension fund.
Yeah, and to be honest, to go back to yes, it's as harmonious as it can be, but you have to factor in that we're no longer kids, and so with age, as you probably experienced, there's a certain amount of things that we've come to accept, and a bit more of a mellowness, and not caring or fighting so much for some of the things that are not important, and having gratitude for the things that and the people that we love. So there's all that goes into play, as well as being in a working band.
Yes, because I can see that you've got quite a schedule. Like you said, you've got a few bits coming up in Denver, and then Belgium. Suddenly, Belgium and Europe and Germany and Blackpool.
Yeah, we'll be in Blackpool. Blackpool, the Rebellion Fest is actually falls on my birthday, so I'll be turning 64 on stage at the Rebellion Fest.
My God, it's a hard-working rocking band up till the autumn, isn't it? Really, there you go. It's
Well, yeah, and like literally, it's like I could complain about like little things, and it's like I don't sweat, I don't sweat the big things. I'm just bitch about the little things. But I'm incredibly grateful. If you would have said to me, "Hey, Xander, punk rock is going to be incredibly popular and lucrative, and you'll be getting a whole new audience and selling out these big rooms." I would have said, "You're crazy." At the age of 63 years old, I would have said, "You're crazy. Punk rock is a trend. It's not going to last, and the whole thing is going to blow up." And so, when I take a look around, the world is unrecognizable to me that I'm in, but it is beyond my wildest dreams that I am, achieving this success after 40 years of grueling, slugging it out and sleeping on people's floors and traveling, in vans with pulling a trailer and stuff, like, man, I mean, we're going to places that we've never been before, doing these European tours and these big. We just played Coachella, and it
right.
was crazy, man. Like we played both weekends; they were both absolutely full to the brim with people going nuts. So
Beautiful. The Coachella crowd embraced you.
yeah, and it's just like you could talk to another man of my age, and they would say, "All my best years have passed." But for me, my best years are just beginning, and I have some advice for your listeners. If
Yes.
you want to do something, if you want to chase a dream, if you want to be a professional musician, you have to be able to weather the frosts to get to the next bloom.
Yes.
And in saying that, times can be very hard, and it could be very, very low valleys. and high peaks that you drop off to and hit every rock and branch on the way down. But if you're curious about what's around the next corner and you keep having a love and passion for what you do, there's no telling what's going to happen. But I can assure you, if you keep turning corners, you're going to turn a good one
Yes.
eventually.
This is great advice. Yes, I know. I remember I did go, I confess it. I did go to one of those Tony Robbins weekend, 5-day weekends, about sort of get the life you want. And he always mentioned about, if there's going to be winters, but there'll be springs. You just have to keep working and you've got to have to persevere and you can't expect it to be easy because life's not like that. So and it certainly
Well, they've been
isn't.
talking about that for all times. There's a book that's like written in the 30s that I found on the side of the road called Think and Get Rich.
Oh,
And it talks
yes.
about that. And, it talks about the fact that most men give up right before they're about to achieve their goal. You know what I mean? Because it's so hard to be a dreamer. You know what I mean? It's like you got to keep dreaming. You got to keep those blinders on. You got to keep those earmuffs on, and look down at the ground. Don't look around because it's scary, and you'll compare yourself to other people who are more successful than you. Just keep moving forward. Keep turning corners.
Yes, absolutely. This is all good. And also, as you say, being on stage keeps you motivated, doesn't it, really? I think this is the great thing. I mean, you were at Coachella, but I did see Ronnie Wood and Rod Stewart at Glastonbury, and I thought, well, he's 80, he's 76, Lulu's 76. I mean, they were looking good. Well, they were looking good for their age. I've seen 60-year-olds who didn't move very well, but
Sure.
they were rocking it a bit. And yes, a lot of people made comments. I thought, well, I'm not sure if you're going to be looking quite so mobile. 80s, dear old Rod, but there you go.
Yeah, well, they'll be sorry when it's a world full of people that have no experience, that writing good music, which I'm seeing, some of the the signs of a lot of the people that really know how to do it and were around, grabbing the fruit from the creative tree when it was plentiful. You look at John Fogerty, you can't like go and see a concert and not hear a song that you're familiar with. You know what I mean? But
Yes.
I have this belief that there was more fruit to put in your bag back then. And the world is running out of ideas. You can see it in film too, all these remakes of films. And, people are making pastiches of old ideas and turning them into something that is supposed to be new. You know what I mean? So they're going to be sorry when they're looking at those old guys and they're, oh God, he looks like crap up there. When they die, there isn't going to be anybody else who knows how to do this shit.
Yes, well, I think that's one of the things they were finding at these festivals is getting someone who can do the headline spot, and it's not as easy as people think. Because I've seen bands who, played the small art centres, the university circuit, but it's a lot different playing in front of 500, 3,000 people to a really big space and look
Yeah.
like you can do it. And yes, it's not
Well,
everybody can.
there's many things that the kids are fighting for, like Black Lives Matter and cancel culture, and Me Too, and all this stuff. But we're out there as almost seniors, and some of us are seniors, saying you don't have to be socked away in an old folks' home. You can still make beautiful art. You can still play very crisp and tidy, riffs and music and stuff. I'm literally on a crusade to show people it doesn't matter how old you are. You need to accept, that it's not about age. It's about the love that you put into it. It's about the enthusiasm. It's about, you know, um, your craft more than anything.
Yes, stay curious, stay
Yeah.
keen, stay forever young.
I still love music. I'm still passionate about it. It's like, here, I could reach right over here, and there's
The
my guitar. I just was playing it just before I got on the
on the yes,
phone
God.
with you.
Nice. Well, there's still a lot. I mean, it's surprising how many people have thought, right, I was in a band once. I'm not going to be in a band again, but I still want to do my solo stuff. I'll get the album. I'll put it on Bandcamp. I might make some copies. I'll still play a little kind of acoustic circuit and just keep going. It's just sort of, yeah, keeps places. There's a place in the Joshua Tree called, is it Harriet and Puppers or something like that?
Happy and Harriet's. Yeah, I was just out there.
Is that a nice place?
It's a great place. I played it several times. It's undergoing new ownership and new management, and everything sort of gets watered down eventually. But yeah, it's a real scene out there. And I was there for my friend Dave Ketching's birthday. Dave is a member of the Eagles of Death Metal and owner and operator of Rancho de la Luna Studios, where Desert Sessions and Queens of the Stone Age and a lot of great records get made out there. And my friend Alan Johannes, who produced my record, was playing with Earthlings, and I saw so many people there that I hadn't seen in years. Chris Goss from Masters of Reality, and there's a really cool scene out there. You know what I mean?
Yes, well,
Um,
I've done quite a lot of interviews with people in the desert, the Joshua
yeah,
Tree kind of deserts, from members of Concrete Blonde to, is it Durwood, who was in Generation X, and people from like Steve, I think Steve Wynn, and who was in Dream Syndicate. I think there's a lot
yeah.
of people who've got shacks out there.
Durwood and myself, when I was playing in the duo Sean and Zander, Durwood, Sean and Zander shared a tour of England and um, Ireland, and so I'm quite familiar with Durwood.
Excellent. God, it's quite. Have you ever been tempted to move out into the sticks?
No, I haven't. Too hot for me, and too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. I like the California coastline, and if I would, I do a survey every time I travel to a different country, and there's so many great cities and there's so many great countries, but there has to be the right temperature. There has to be a melting pot of culture. You know what I mean? Like different people from different cultures and different backgrounds. There has to be multiple options, and it has to be near the sea and near the desert. My best guess, for me, if I was ever to move to Europe, would be, the north of Spain. You know,
Right. Yes. So you're in LA at the moment?
yeah, I've been in LA off and on for the whole time. Yeah.
Yes. And just moving forward, you've got this album, and you've got the Circle Jerks for the rest of the year, and possible studio stuff. Is there any other projects that you've got sort of slowly fermenting in the background?
Well, I did do the movie with Alex in Spain and some of the Western sets in Tucson, and it's a pretty big role for me. And I don't know what's going to happen with that film, but it's I'm pretty sure I did a pretty good job in it, or so I've been told. Um, that's going to be coming out at some point.
That's going to be fantastic. I'll have to, yes, I'll be very excited with this. Deal with
Yeah.
Alex Cox. It'll be good, actually. And have you got any plans on getting another cat? This is the big question. Is this a
Not
difficult
until
one?
Not until the travel. I don't think the circle jerks are sustainable forever. We're celebrating Keith's 70th birthday at the Palladium this year with Rocket and the Crip and Ceremony and Negative Approach supporting. And it's you know this kind of energy is not sustainable throughout time, and so
The
um,
seven. Yes.
we don't know, and it's like I'm trying to set myself up for it, and of course, all those options that we face when we get older. Oh, maybe I should do visual art, maybe I should start painting, maybe I should write a book, maybe I should kind of go make public appearances and tell my story. You know what I mean? Maybe we should make a documentary about me, blah blah blah, all the bullshit that all of us are faced with, you know um putting putting a cap on our legacy, you know?
Yes, this is true. But yes, but anyway, a cap or a cat, it's a tricky one, isn't it, really?
Yeah, so I'm not going to get a cat until things simmer down. And, you know, I literally had a meeting with another director the other day who wants me to contribute music and act in a film that he's developing. So who knows? Maybe I'll be one of those character actors who, you know, was a washed up child actor and in his older years became a successful character actor.
This is magic. Well, the main thing is to always have a project to look forward to, and I think then you keep young, don't you?
Yeah.
That's the
It's so
key.
long as you love it, so long as it's, you know, it's something that you want to do. Don't do what you don't want to do.
This is true. Yeah, I know. This is yes, because literally, yes, it's not worth it. I know it's different when you're younger, but when you get older, yeah, the sands of time and all that cliche. But anyway, look, this has been amazing. Thank you ever so much for your time. I've really
Of
enjoyed
course,
this.
man. This is great. You're fantastic. I'm so glad it worked out after all these, you know,
Yes,
different exchanges of like, when can we do it, you know, and blah blah blah, and like, you
that's
know, not
right.
having the time and having, you know, miscommunication and all that stuff. It's great to finally meet you and actually talk to you.
Yes, it was 2023 that we first mentioned each other. That was amazing.
Yeah, sometimes things, you know, take some time. You have to be patient.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes people are just like, not now, come back to me next year. Anyway, look, have a lovely day, and I hope you really enjoy your summer and Blackpool on your birthday. I mean, let's face it, it'll be magical. It's going to be nice.
Come on
Anyway,
up.
I will, yeah, definitely.
We'll have some
Excellent.
Indian food.
Yeah, Blackpool. It'll be nice. Anyway, look, take care. Have a lovely day and yeah, just look after yourself. Okay, see you.
Thank you so much, David.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
And that, dear listener, as you can gather, is the end of the interview. Massive thanks to Zander for giving me the time for that. This has been the C86 Show. David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on all these social media platform sites. Just do C86 Show. All these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Just check them out. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.